Alright guys, chapter 18, Colonial Encounters in Asia and Africa, 1750-1950, section 5, Believing and Belonging, Identity and Culture Change in the Colonial Era. Alright, let's get started. Okay, education. For many in the colonial or in the colonized areas, getting a Western education created a whole new identity. And it was almost a magical power of literacy that's really fueled this drive towards education. And it also allowed for an escape from obligations like forced labor, because it gave many access to better jobs, as well as the possibility of social mobility and elite status. So there were new doors to opportunities. Western education provided a variety of new opportunities and privileges for those that were unlucky enough to receive schooling. Wealth, employment, and higher status came with literacy in the colonizer's language. And there were many people that actually embraced the European culture. It, however, did create a cultural divide between them and the vast majority of the population. And many of the Western educated elite saw colonial rule as the path to a better future, at least at first. In India, they organized reform societies to renew Indian culture, and their hopes for renewal through colonial rule were disappointed. So, adopting European culture, as many educated elite adopted these various aspects, including dress, speech, marriage, ceremonies, and housing. And some saw collaboration with European conquerors as a path toward that modernity for their societies, in a way to eliminate injustices and abuses that had actually been enshrined as traditional. But it was essentially a glass ceiling. Unfortunately, many willing colonial collaborators found that Europeans would not treat them as equals, and racism and condescending view of native culture as primitive and backwards ensured that they were never equal partners. Alright, religion. Widespread conversion in Christianity in New Zealand, the Pacific Islands, and non-Muslim Africa happened around about 10,000 missionaries had gone to Africa by 1910, and by the 1960s, some 50 million Africans were Christian. And Christianity was attractive to many people in Africa. Military defeat really shook their belief in the old gods, and Christianity was associated with modern education and new opportunities, and it gave opportunities to the young, the poor, and many women. And Christianity spread mostly through Native Africans. The Christian missionaries in Africa, as well as the Pacific, like New Zealand and other Pacific Islands, and in non-Muslim Africa, Christian missionaries made dramatic gains with large-scale conversions. But there were religious conflicts over gender and sexuality. Conversion to Christianity was not without its cultural conflicts. Debates over gender roles, sexual practice, and traditions such as female circumcision produced serious disputes, and missionaries were concerned about Christians who practiced pagan and tribal traditions and saw them as almost like backsliders. And eventually Christianity was Africanized, right? So they continued using charms and medicine men, and many just simply demonized their old gods. Didn't completely get rid of them. There's a wide array of independent churches that were also established. But Christianity, however, didn't spread widely in India. but it led intellectuals and reformers to define Hinduism. And Hindu leaders looked to offer spiritual support to the spiritually sick Western world. And so this new definition of Hinduism helped distill a clear sense of Muslims as a distinct community within India. So this is almost like a colonial definition of Hinduism. In India, the British were overwhelmed by the varieties of religious practices and sought to establish a clear and codified definition of the local faiths as almost a single religion. And the scholars and missionaries who studied South Asian religion promoted the idea of an orthodox form of Hinduism. And some Indians adopted this definition of theory and ritual as a way of reforming their faith. Alright, race and tribe. Now the notions of race and ethnicity were central to new ways of belonging in these new Western European colonies and how things were changing. By 1900, some African thinkers began to define an African identity, and it's almost like they were united for the first time by the experience of colonial oppression. Because uniting many Africans was very difficult. They were so distinct from each other. And some argued that African culture and history had the characteristics valued by Europeans, like complex political systems and things like that. And some praised the differences between Africa and Europe. In the 20th century, such ideas reached an even broader public. Hundreds of thousands of Africans took part in World War I, and many Africans traveled widely around the world. And for most of them, the most important new sense of belonging was the idea of tribe, or ethnic identity. And those ethnic groups were defined much more clearly thanks to Europeans. And Africans found ethnic identity useful. And that is the end of Section 5, Believing and Belonging.